Hello, Leah, and welcome to the Do Good and Do Well podcast. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It is a delight to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Good. Um, right, we're going to get straight into it. So, I have invited you on the podcast because I'm really interested in your work around mediation and social restoration, and you're a founder and a leader, and so it makes sense to talk to you. And so, first question is, can you talk about mediation and let's try that again, restoration? Like what are those things and how are they connected for you?
Absolutely. So, mediation is a process, and that's something that helps address conflict between individuals or groups of people. I think it can be really effective at helping people move forwards when they are in conflict by using a neutral facilitator. I got into mediation because I've often sat in the middle of conflict. What I'm really passionate about is reconciliation. I want to see people preserving relationships, especially at work,
Mm.
and not just agreeing to disagree, but being better off relationally than they were before they had the conflict. And I think that that's quite rare in society. I think we don't really know how to have difficult conversations. We don't really know how to move past feelings of harm. And so this heart for reconciliation has led me to restorative justice, a similar process to mediation, but it's where individuals who have suffered harm can seek redress from the person who has offended them or hurt them. And so, even the more nefarious the events, the more transformative that process can be for both people around the table. And it's a picture of relational healing that is kind of unthinkable in British culture. It's kind of outside of the realms of contemplation for most of us in British society, but it is incredibly healing. And I think it possibly holds the key to social cohesion in Britain.
Yeah, yeah. I think that what you said is, I mean, I know that I am very conflict avoidant for various reasons. And I have worked with lots of people who even before we even get into the really difficult stuff, struggle to even assert their own needs, to say, what it is they want because they don't want to hurt someone else's feelings, they don't want to offend. And it feels as if we don't have those skills. So I hear what you're saying about that culture that we're living in as well, but also, and maybe because of that, we don't develop these skills and being able to really have deep conversations and understand each other's perspectives and what so you come from a law background, don't you, which is hence the restorative justice stuff. Like, can you explain a little bit more about that process and how you sort of ended here doing this?
Well, as with all things in life, it was not a straight line. And I think if I had been more curious, if I had been more patient with myself, I probably would have gotten here earlier. I'm a corporate lawyer and I was trained to advise big businesses. I did those deals that were on the front page of the Financial Times. It was a million miles away from dealing with the relationships around the board table. But before I did that, I wanted to be an advocate. I was called to the bar. I had these grand designs of being a barrister. And I never wanted to go to the criminal bar. I never wanted to go into the family courts. I never wanted to do that kind of immigration work because of my own story. At the time, I was going through incredible challenges with my family. And I think that was where my first kind of exposure to mediation began. But I didn't want to be associated with it. So I never really investigated the criminal justice system. I didn't do any internships. I didn't work with the probation services. I didn't investigate social work. I was just everything like that was too close to the bone. So as I progressed in my career, I found myself using the skills that I'd gained through a very difficult family environment to help in the workplace. Because what I worked out is the issues that people are presenting with at work are mirrors of the experiences that they've had as children. And whatever their family of origin story is, that's going to impact the way that they show up authentically. It's going to impact the way that they view themselves, the way that they are leaders. And so here I was in situations where leadership teams were in crisis. There was a huge amount of litigation. There was a huge amount of interpersonal conflict that was not resolved, even though they were continuing to show up to work every day and working together. And several years later, I was in a, I suppose, more privileged position of being a decision maker and having a seat at the table and dealing with the same issues and wondering, why are we not able to remove self-interest from the decision-making table? And it was because in the moments of stress and challenge and crisis, it's all about ego. It's all about the things that are surging up from within you, taking control of your decision-making faculties, and you're not necessarily able to act differently. And it's not about being rational or irrational. It's all of those things from your inner child that are surging up. It's an evidence of a lack of healing. So I went off and I got qualified as an accredited mediator. And then I very quickly was like, well, I'm working in boardrooms, so I probably need to specialize in workplace and employment mediation. And I did that too. But I realized that there was more. It wasn't just about, okay, you're coming to me with a conflict. It's somebody's been hurt here and that's not being acknowledged. Or somebody needs to understand why they were spoken to in that way and that's not being discussed. Or somebody needs an apology that goes beyond what an employer can offer because of the confines or the parameters in which that process is taking place. And so I said, okay, at the WayFinders Group, which is the company that I run, we're all about joined up thinking and multidisciplinary and taking things from other areas and using those tools to benefit another environment. And I started investigating the possibility of going on a trip to South Africa, where I was working with the Society of Mediators to lead on a mediation and restorative justice training program. And we spent 6 months designing this program. Week in, week out, we were like, what's the context in South Africa? What are we speaking into? What are the needs of the communities? What are the needs of the individuals in the townships that are going to be showing up to these processes? How can we equip these practitioners with the skills that they need to be able to intervene well? And what will it look like to improve their professional practices from, they were social workers, lawyers, community leaders, a whole bunch of backgrounds. They run UN NGOs across South Africa, but predominantly in Johannesburg. And I was like, there's something in this. I'm going to go and I'm going to try and figure out how this is relevant to our boardrooms, how this is relevant to our local authorities, how this is relevant to our schools and our universities, our prisons, our police. How can we take these restorative principles and address some of the harm that has just been swept under the rug and is creating situations of emotional whack-a-mole all over the shop? Which is why we have so many crazy stories on the front pages of our papers.
That's big stuff. That's big stuff. That
Yes.
also, I say that, but also it's also small stuff. It's like it's the inner world, isn't it? And that piece about ego, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not about ego, not in the sense of like, I've got to be the best and it's only about me. It might not even be conscious, but as you say, it's that I was going to say triggering. I know that that's this kind of awkward, but what is triggering us? What's coming out, and how are we not able to stay calm and in our rational uh our sort of what I call it, like our wise Jedi self, whereas you say it's taking that self-interest out and looking at the facts and what have we got here and laying it out on the table and then staying regulated in our nervous system. So it's that inner peace, inner calm, which could then, if we could then impact these big, wide issues of how actually we all move through the world and how we connect with each other. So for you, thinking about this work, like what are the signs, what are the behaviors that we might be seeing in the workplace where you might think, bit of mediation might be helpful there, or yeah, I think we need a bit of this work here. What do you see? And you've mentioned a couple of things, but can you talk more about that?
I've always been somebody who reads the room, but I'm also really observant. And body language in a situation where somebody feels uncomfortable in a hierarchical situation, uh, wh- somebody is exploiting their power over them or making them feel uncomfortable or not giving credit for their work, or perhaps a situation where somebody hasn't done something well and their supervisor doesn't know how to address that appropriately, or a situation where a line manager is dealing with somebody in their team who's neurodivergent and they don't have the skills or the tools to understand the presentation of the individual that they're responsible for. It could be, and this comes up a lot in finance teams, they've had to make a decision that the rest of the board doesn't understand and doesn't appreciate that they've got responsibility for, and so doesn't ask the right questions. It could be an issue of succession or replacement. You've got somebody leaving and you need to get agreement on who's coming in next. It could be that somebody's leaving for reasons of misconduct and that the process itself has been very challenging and people around the table haven't had an opportunity to reflect on what's happened, be engaged in that process, again, seek redress for ways in which they might have been affected or harmed by that conduct. Or you could just have situations where you want to make a unanimous decision on something and you just can't get everybody to agree. Simple things like, what's the company's mission? What is our vision? What are our values? It's versatile. I think people underestimate the value of a neutral facilitator. They see it, when actually I'm not coming in to do your job for you. You're the expert at what you do. I'm just here to help you be the best version of yourself. And if conflict is preventing you from being the best version of yourself, or fear of conflict preventing you from being the best version of yourself, this is the time where you ask for help so that you can achieve your potential, so that you can achieve your goals, so that you can perform.
The word that popped up in my head then was shame. Shame to ask for help, shame that you can't figure this stuff out. Because, I think most people would feel like, maybe this is just me being optimistic, but I think most people would feel that they're, good human beings trying their best. But because of all the things that you've just talked about, it might be really difficult to have these conversations, to ask for someone external to come in, because then you're, for want of a better phrase, airing your dirty laundry. That can feel quite shaming, especially I think for leaders and founders who feel like they have to have figured this stuff out. Like they're the one that people look up to. They're the ones that should have the answer to know which way to go forward. So to be able to ask for that external support, it's a bit like coaching, I think. So, you're asking people to be in quite a vulnerable position that they might not always be in. Just any more thoughts on that?
I do agree with that. But it is a way forwards, because getting things stuck is not helping you move forwards. And the thing about conflict is that avoiding it doesn't make it go away. What? I'm telling you. I think leaders don't like to sit in the tension. They don't like the waiting. They want to do something. They want to fix it. They want to move through it. But they only have an appreciation and this comes to communication, I'll come on to that in a second, they don't necessarily have an appreciation for why they are struggling to move forwards. And it could be something in themselves, or it could be the way that they're approaching it, or it could be the people that they have around them. So one of the number one reasons for conflict is that communication has broken down. Now, when we speak, I assume that you understand what I am saying in the way that I have said it. If I do not ask you to repeat back to me what you have heard to clarify your understanding of it, you may well have taken away something completely unrelated to what it is that I've just said. We often, so often, miss each other in day-to-day parlance. If that's happening over a consistent period of time in a leadership team, the chasm is just getting wider and wider and wider. And you think that you're on the same page with somebody and they're over there and you're over there. And the question is, how do we get back? And you being over here are probably not the right person to get somebody else back here. So I think there's a huge self-awareness piece here. And this is where leaders often fall down, because most people have had to do some kind of internal digging to progress in life. But there are a lot of people who haven't. And there are a lot of people who don't understand themselves or have a desire to understand themselves and the way that they are communicating with others, or the way that they see the world, or, just having perhaps a lack of curiosity about those things. And I can say that because I'm a thinker, and it stands out that I think about these things all the time and most people don't. So it's not judgment. I think it's just a reality that I've been trying to work out how to help leaders become more self-aware in the process of mediation without being the focus of the mediation. It's just a byproduct. Yeah. And by sitting in situations where leaders are missing each other and exercising that curiosity of, well, why do you think they think that about you? And how would you feel if I told you I had permission to tell you that this is how they feel about you? And would it change your day-to-day experience if you understood not just that they supported you entirely, but they want to do everything that they can in this process to help you thrive? And it creates these light bulb moments, not about the revelation about how somebody else feels about them, but how they feel about themselves and what they've contributed to this situation, and being empowered to take responsibility for what you're bringing to the table only comes through self-awareness. Yeah. And usually that's a really painful process. But because it's not the focus of what you're doing in mediation, you're there to discuss a problem and to move forwards. It can be enjoyable. I'm not saying it's always enjoyable. And more often than not, I think if you're in conflict with somebody, you just want to get through that process as quickly as possible. But it is a real opportunity for transformation, to see yourself in a different light, to clarify how you've understood a situation, to get to know the people around the table better, without immediately being faced with more conflict, and being able to move through the process in a way that feels comfortable to you. So to answer your question, the term that's often bandied around for leaders to provide for their workplaces is psychological safety. But I think leaders forget that they also need psychological safety, because it is all they feel comfortable with themselves, confident, and able to trust the people that they have around them, that they can have that vulnerability to say, do you know what? I want to move this thing forwards, but I recognize that I'm not the right person to move this forwards. And if I want to bring you all with me, we need to bring somebody else in. And this is what this is going to look like. And that is leadership. We hear about this. Curiosity, humility. Those are really key to leadership. That's not the way that it's taught on MBA courses. And that's okay. It's the practical, what was soft skills before, but it's really function of a person and the ability to develop yourself and to grow.
Yeah, it's, there's a lot of research that says emotional intelligence is way more important in a workplace, particularly for leaders. I mean, for everyone, but for leaders than IQ. And emotional intelligence is all about self-awareness. And I think you're absolutely right. Psychological safety is for everybody. It's a bit like well-being. Like well-being is for everybody. not just your staff, it's for you as well, leaders, founders, listen to this. Um, and yeah, I suppose so I was just thinking about what advice or suggestions might you give to someone who is listening to this, might be noticing, oh, some of the things Leah said, I'm seeing or I'm feeling, not quite ready to ask for help yet, maybe. Is there anything they can do beforehand that might be helpful? Or is it, no, you need someone else here?
There's a reason that on the show, I Want to Be a Millionaire, there is a phone a friend option. And it's a process of discovery, of self-discovery, of figuring out what you need, of figuring out what you're experiencing. I think to take that time to just stop and write down in your mind what you perceive the issue to be, and to try and find some agency in that process. What is it? What can I do about it? What is my responsibility? Where is this come from? And here's the great one. Where else has something like this shown up in my life? How did I deal with it before? Have I tried to deal with it in the same way? Again, that curiosity about the problem is a good place to start, because I think then you will very quickly realize what you need. Is it that you just need comfort? This is a problem that's going to go away, or this is a problem that you actually do have the tools to be able to address yourself? Or is it something deeper? Is it something that you need to go to a therapist for? Or is it something that you need to help you overcome over a longer period of time? Or is it a work issue that has to be dealt with by engaging other stakeholders at work, and you need to just make a suggestion as to how it would be helpful and supportive and beneficial to everybody around the table to deal with this in a particular way? And I think having that agency is the first thing that we lose, because in a situation of challenge, we are confronted by a lack of control. And so maintaining a sense of agency in every stage of what you're going through will empower you to make decisions based on your gut instincts, will encourage you to ask for help, and will encourage you to stay committed to finding a solution.
Mm, yeah. It's reminding me of the conversation I had in the last episode with Dr. Claire Plumley about burnout, and about, really being able to access yourself in that sense, to understand what it is you need in that moment. And as you say, it might be a series of questions you just work through and see what the outcome is. It might be a coach, it might be it might be therapy, it might be a mediator. But in the first instance, really being able to try and stay in the moment, and access the parts of you that haven't been hijacked by the other parts of you that perhaps make it more difficult. I'm really curious about, and I think you've touched upon this, but I wonder if you could talk more about, from your own perspective as a founder of an organization that's doing this work, what is it? Can you talk more about what is it that you want to make better, or that you want to be different?
I have seen a lot. In fact, I was on a call last week with somebody that I worked with 3 years ago. And he says, Leah, as a practitioner, there is nothing that you have not seen. Like, you're in a rare position. Most people don't have that privilege at this stage of their careers. I want to see better leadership. But that sounds really trite. I would like to see people take responsibility for the way that they show up at work, for the decisions that they make, and the impact that they have on the people coming up behind them. I'm a signatory, as on behalf of the WayFinders Group, to the Better Business Act. And I really am convinced that better governance results in greater social responsibility as well as greater profits. And so, again, it's back to this removal of self-interest. And that doesn't have to be an altruistic thing. I would like people to be able to be objective and rational in decision making and take responsibility when the Incredible Hulk comes out. But to also recognize that there is a path back from the Hulk. You know, you don't have to be ejected from the organization. You could just be humble and fall on your sword and say, you know, I'm sorry. So to create that situation where you're addressing those, I'm going to call them symptoms of fear. So everything from guilt and anxiety, um, shame, embarrassment, fear of failure, those things that come from the insecurities that lie within, they don't belong in the boardroom. And I'm not saying that we need to be autonomous robots who let AI take the reins to make the decisions for us. But what I am saying is, in the same way that to have emotionally healthy relationships, I need to own my stuff. I want leaders in the boardrooms to have healthy emotional selves so that their baggage is not impacting on the business's direction or its ability to move forwards or its ability to achieve its potential or its ability to achieve its mission. And this is even more important in purpose-driven enterprises, particularly in charitable work where you've got to be good stewards of the donations that have been bestowed upon you, or if you're in a listed company and you have shareholder profits to concern yourself with. But I think it's just as important for the sole practitioner to be able to invest in your own development and to have a recognition that there isn't necessarily an objective standard of leadership. It is, what does becoming a better leader look like for you? And that's what you've got to own. That's what you've got to aspire to. We're not homogenous creatures. We have different skills and abilities and proclivities and fears. And, you know, to be an excellent leader, I don't need to be like X. I just need to work on the things that hold me back. And so I want to kind of catalyze that process. I work in change management. I want to see people change so that they can thrive. And that's really challenging because these are the things that we've historically kept out of corporate environments. It's an unpopular offering to some degree. But don't we all want emotional freedom? Don't we all actually want to have the freedom that comes from this investment in personal development, this ability to navigate change well, this ability to face unknown unknowns with confidence, with a toolkit that enables you to work through it systematically and eventually get where it is that you're trying to go? I think so.
Yeah, and there's also about having, you know, strong relationships at work. We are social beings. We want to feel connected. We want to feel a sense of community. So there's ourselves within that, and then there's how we then relate to other people. And you know, you want to go to work on a basic level. You want to go to work and have a good time. You want to feel like at the end of the day, when your head hits the pillow, I had a good day. You know, it might have been tough. We might have been facing really difficult challenges, but we worked together. We figured stuff out. We had open and honest conversations. I haven't come away feeling like, oh, what do they really think about me? Because I know because they told me. And yeah, that feels like a great place to stop, you know, and help people with. I wonder, because I'm always, for me, there's always a slight, I don't think tension is the right word, but there's something around what we can do as an individual within these bigger systems and structures that are impacting our lives, who we are, how, you know, our childhoods. Um, I wonder for you where that sits.
I am more realist than idealist. I know that's hard to believe, but it's true. That's the lawyer in me. I think one of the things that is significant is this gradual shift from living in community to functioning as individuals in isolation that has been exacerbated by globalism and technology. That means that we find so much more of our identity in what we do, who we spend our time with, where we go, what car we drive, kind of dog we own, because those are all things that create opportunities for connection and community. I'm a big proponent of start small and, planting seeds that grow at all levels of society. And I think the best way to bring about change is to be the change that you want to see. Again, it sounds really trite. I found it really hard to start to live these things out. I found it really hard to get out of my own way in the course of this practice. I cannot explain to you how challenging it is to sit between warring people and to not have space for you in that situation, to offer up empathy at a time where you feel like your cup is empty, but that is what is most needed. But I think the intention and stating that intention is what is important. You're not going to get it right all the time, but I think it's a process. You just take one step at a time. You do what you can. You offer up an honest conversation or an opportunity for trust or an invitation to do things differently, and you see where the chips fall. And I think, yes, it is completely overwhelming to 2024. But I also think that there are such impactful opportunities day to day to find joy in, hey, this is a really great opportunity to have what feels like a really healthy conversation. I was writing some slides last night for a workshop I'm giving this week on difficult conversations. And one of the exercises asks, what's the best conversation you've ever had? How did it make you feel? Why do you want to have it again? Because if you go into what's going to be a difficult conversation with an awareness of where you want to go and how you want to feel at the end of it, you're going to approach it completely differently than if it's something that you're completely dreading and, you've worked yourself up until 3 and you're like, I don't think I can do this. I think these tools are basic, which means that they are accessible and achievable. But I think they're also like muscles, and we've got to go to the gym and we've got to work out. And, I've stopped going to the gym and so my muscles have started to atrophy. But I know that at any point I can go back to the gym and I can go back to weightlifting and I can build up that stamina again. And so it's not a one-time offer that's going to be off the table. It's okay, maybe this is not the season for you to flex that muscle, but know that that is available to you in future.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of things that resonated with me around, well, it reminded me of something my coaching supervisor said to me quite a few years ago now. She said something like, systems are made up of people. And so there is that piece. I think there's something about awareness of what might be impacting what is in the space here. So it might be something about me, it might be something about you, it might be something about the other stuff that's happening. I'm waving my arms around if anyone's not watching this. But ultimately, I think be the change you want to see is such a brilliant thing to remember. The other thing was, I think you're absolutely right about how you approach things like difficult conversations, those having those tools and having a different way of doing the things you've always done before. I'd run some training where we talk about difficult conversations and we say, how do we go from it feeling like a difficult conversation to a curious one? Exactly what you're saying. How can we feel more excited or more motivated to figure this stuff out? Because we can think, oh, if we have this conversation, things could be better. And they might not just be better by a little bit, they could be better by a lot. That would be nice to have. Um, and then the third thing I think that came up for me was we're gonna get it wrong. We're trying this stuff. It's like if we do that the gym analogy, it's like putting too much weight on too quickly, and you try and you do a deadlift, and you're like, oh, maybe I've gone a bit too far with that. But knowing that you can take some off, you can take some off, build the muscle, add more on. But we need to have that sense of self-compassion. We need to stop beating ourselves up about why we're not, you know, lifting 50 kg in the first gym session. That we are wired in certain ways for all sorts of reasons. So it's going to feel clunky and weird and sometimes difficult, and we might get it wrong. And we might need to come back and try it again in a slightly different way, but that's okay. And I think that goes back to that psychological safety in the workplace. If that exists, then that creates a space for people to be able to do that and to make mistakes.
I agree. I agree.
Yes. Good. Leah, you are a CEO, a founder. You have a lot going on. You're trying to change the world. You're helping individuals. What is it that you do to look after yourself? So when you're finding that things might be feeling particularly challenging, what is it you do to help yourself mitigate some of those challenges? Do you call in a mediator?
I mean, I live in the kind of high octane. Uh, So I'm a member at Floatworks in London, which for those who don't know is a number of rooms with a number of pods in which there are, I think, 500 kilos of Epsom salts that get dissolved in warm water. If you're claustrophobic, it's probably not for you. But the long and short of it is that you open the tank, get in the tank, close the door, turn the light off, and float in darkness in the salt water for 50 minutes. And I often book double sessions, so I get 2 hours in there, and I just feel the weightlessness. And it's fantastic for stress relief. It's great for those with PTSD or complex PTSD. It's a time for reflection where I empty my mind, and a good float session is when I've fallen asleep. It's like the perfect daytime nap. When I lived around the corner from where Floatworks is in Vauxhall, I used to book the last session of the day. It was perfect wind down before bed. But all this to say, we need space to process our thoughts and our feelings. And so I've worked out that there are 2 types of ways of doing this. I can massively push my cortisol through the roof and I can go for a run, or I can go and play netball with my law firm team, or I can go for the slow release. And so I'll go for super long walks with the dog. I mean, like between 10 and 15 miles. I just take a day and I'm like, this process and breathe and think and pray and recalibrate. So that would be a good day off. I've learned that it's not that helpful to talk to my friends about business related challenges. I find that I end up more frustrated than I was when I started, either because I'm like, you don't understand what I do, or you don't really care about this. And if you cared about me, you'd care about this. And, it's just not constructive. So I try not to do that. But I do need to talk to somebody about it. So I talk to my high performance coach, who is amazing. And I mean, it's probably not a good session if I haven't cried. So there is that. But I think it's also knowing your tribe. I have people in my corner. When I started this business, I'd convinced myself that I didn't have people in my corner, and it was a lie. They were just waiting for me to figure out what it is I've been trying to do and to communicate that in a way that they could understand. And then they're like, great, I understand. Let me help you. So, investing in relationships that matter to you, that are mutually encouraging and supportive and equipping you to become the best version of yourself. And there's a lot of shedding in growth that we don't like to. And there are a lot of people who don't like change or don't feel comfortable with your decisions because they're not decisions that they would make. And, you know, oxygen mask, you've got to do what you were made to do. And that means that you have to make difficult decisions sometimes. But I think by creating forums where I can process and think, and I think really align with what I know internally, spirit-led leader over here, but the gut instincts that I have to propel me forwards often involve difficult decisions. And to create spaces where I can sit with those long enough to find the courage to be able to act, essential.
Mm, I love that description. There's something about, well, firstly, I've wanted to do one of those float pod Ujima flicks for ages.
I'll
Uh,
send you a credit. No problem. You can
that
go.
would be
That's
amazing.
in London.
That would be amazing, because the idea of being able to not be stimulated by anything, just, oh man, I need that in my life. Then there's something about connection, but yeah, so that's disconnection and then connection, and being true to yourself, listening to yourself. I loved what you just said then about finding spaces where you can sit in some of that discomfort and understand it, and then find the courage to be able to figure out what the next best step is. Because I think all that, it does take courage to do this work when you are passionate and you care about making change. And it feels like, and it sometimes feels like you're swimming upstream and not making any change. And actually, sometimes it feels like things are worse than they were when you first started. Being able to have that time where you can and sit and not be hijacked by a dysregulated nervous system that's telling you that everything's terrible and it's not working and you should give up and go and get a job or leave the organization that you're in, or whatever it is, having that space to really think and feel, and notice and get curious. I think, yeah, it's essential. Um, I just wonder, before we finish up and I ask you about how people can find you, um, whether you could just talk a little bit more about your plans around restorative justice, because I know you're doing a particular piece of work on this.
I am. So, one of the privileges of having a complex corporate structure that involves a community interest company is that we can get grants and donations to do work. And that is how we financed the trip to South Africa, where 3 people from the WayFinders Group went. But I wanted to do an impact report, partly to honor the donor, partly to recognize the work, partly to capitalize on what we learned while we were away. And so at the moment, I am writing a white paper. The provisional title is From Harm to Healing, and it's all about embedding restorative practices in leadership in the criminal justice system. We've been talking in so many different environments about we've got to reform sentencing, we've got to reform the prisons, we've got to reform probation, we've got to reform rehabilitation. And I'm like, hang on, what if we start at the very beginning of the process? What if we can create the cultures at the outset before we've even arrested somebody to then permeate through the rest of the system? So I'm thinking a lot about that. And I'm thinking about the ways in which elevating punishment over relational healing and an opportunity to atone or to meet face to face with the individual that you have caused harm to is doing us a disservice. Now, I have this situation. I lecture at Canterbury Christ Church University for mediation, and they're constantly trying to water down mediation, and mediators basically saying, you don't care about the legal system. You don't want to have precedents in the courts because, you want to mediate everything because you think that that's more effective. And the counter argument over here in the criminal justice system is, well, Leah, if you're advocating for restorative justice, then you don't believe in punishment as a tool to deter crime across society. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that there is a legacy and that there is a cost that is currently going unpaid. And I'm wondering whether by, we've had these riots this summer. Why have we had this constant unrest between authority and the public? It's because there's never any relational interaction in the process. There's never any recognition that things could have gone differently or better, or that somebody needs to be able to process that differently, or that there's any recognition that trust really has broken down and that there is a path to rebuild it. So I'm writing about that. I'm thinking about that. And I'm hopefully going to pilot a program about that. But I can't say anything about that right now. We'll see where we get to with that.
Well, we'll just have to have you back so we can hear about that another time. That sounds really important and fascinating, and I really hear your curiosity around it. Like, what if? I'm wondering if. What could it look like if? Yeah, and I guess recognizing the complexity of that's very complex. Thank you, Leah. If individuals or organizations they'd like to hear more from you, understand how you can help them, how do they get in touch? Where can they go?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I'm Leah Brown, FRSA, or I'm under the WayFinders Group. You might also find me on the Longest Day podcast page. And on Instagram and TikTok, I am at Seen Heard Spoken. And on X/Twitter and Blue Sky, I am at Only One Leah.
Lovely, thank you. I will put all of that in the show notes. So if you didn't catch that, go and have a look there. And I would just like to recommend the Longest Day podcast. It's fascinating. And before we came on, I was talking to Leah about how she really inspired me thinking about this podcast. The brilliant question: what was your longest day, and what did you learn about it? What did you learn about yourself? What are you taking forward from that experience? And she interviews the most amazing people. So go and have a listen to that. Thank you, Leah. It's been a pleasure. There's so much that we haven't talked about and unpacked. But I really appreciate you sharing your time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've just loved this conversation, and it's great to talk about the things that I've been up to.
Yay. Thanks, Leah.